Okay, welcome back to another lecture in Introduction to Sociology. We're going to be focusing in this lecture on social change. And I'm going to approach this as an introduction to social change. And much like we have seen throughout the semester with chapters and topics in Introduction to Sociology, about every chapter is an introduction to that part of sociology. So, sociology has a number of different specialty areas. Specialties, or people specialize in the study of race, or the study of gender, or the study of culture, on and on and on. And in an introduction to sociology class, it's largely an introduction into that part of sociology. And we're going to see that with this chapter on social change. So, we're going to take a broad consideration of social change, thinking about how society has changed over the course of human history. But we're also going to focus on some practical considerations and practical look at change in modern societies. And there's a number of different factors that go into social change, and chief among those is the understanding of culture and the understanding of how society is made up. So, having said all that, let's just go on and jump into looking at a few things here. So, starting out, what do we mean by social change? Well, social change is transformation of culture and social institutions over time. And matter of fact, I just mentioned that. Let me move my camera over here just a tad bit so you can see that. Transformation of culture and social institutions over time. So that is a really short little bullet point you see there. But that's the most profound statement about what social change is. That's the most profound statement that you're going to see in this lecture. And, we're going to elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, how do you do that? Or what does it look like? Some things that we're going to look at, major characteristics. Social change happens all the time. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's super large. Sometimes it is intentional, but often unplanned. I would say that major social change that doesn't happen by chance is highly planned, lots of strategy. And there is a lot of research around social movements. This chapter is a good introduction into the idea of modern social problems. That is a very popular course taught in sociology, and I teach that course myself, where you define what modern social problems are, and then you also look at social movements. And so, yes, you could be very strategic in promoting social change without a doubt. So sometimes intentional. Well, probably the best social change is intentional. I don't know. People might argue about that. And, well, the best social change is something that happens that's quite organic. Well, the problem is that not a lot of social change happens that's organic. That just comes out of somebody having a good idea about something and it snowballs from that. You do see examples of that, but that's like lightning in a bottle. You don't see it very often. Next on here, social change is controversial because it usually is something different than the current state or the current status quo, or social change promotes some change in the status quo. All right. Some changes matter more than others. Okay. Social change is different than personal change. So I could change my habits and go on a diet and try to change my health. That's a personal change. Social change is much bigger than that and affects usually larger populations of people. Okay. All right. So moving forward here, what better way to understand social change than to understand the makeup of society? And this is something that we've talked about all semester long. And you might remember when I interspersed culture into this idea of social institutions and social structure. So that's a great diagram. Where am I at over here? That's a great diagram to look at, to think about how do you institute change, because that is where the organization of society is. Well, it beckons to reason then that you go to the places where society is organized in order to change. And so a lot of the change that we see in society can be found exactly in these areas that we're talking about. One thing I will say about this one right here, a lot of people think, the general public and a overwhelming majority of people think, that the only way to achieve social change is through government policy and law. So much so that in the United States, I think it's quite evident that you see people put a lot of investment, whether it's time, resources, or mental energy, into elections. And they have their team or their person that they want to get elected. And there's a belief that after that person is elected, that is going to be the agenda, or that's how things are going to happen. And that's probably why we don't see as much social change, cultural change, maybe in some cases, that we would like to see. Because if you just rely on government and politics, then you're leaving out all these other aspects of society. And so, if you're going to do planned social change, it reasons, again, that you would want to target each one of these social institutions for having large-scale social change. Sure, laws can be passed that affect everybody in these institutions, but comprehensive social change, a social movement, would tap into each one of these in some form or fashion. So, again, that's an important point to note. I think a lot of people rely on government and politics to take care of things, and as a result, they don't engage themselves in community or civic engagement. And that's not my job, it's the job of elected officials. Well, elected officials and laws can only go so far. Cultural change is not just law and policy, it's also norms and values and beliefs. And that can extend, across society, right? So there's that. Next, cultural change involves three important sources, okay? Invention, the production of new objects, ideas, and social patterns. That, folks, is technology, whether it's material technology or non-material technology. Discovery, noticing existing elements of a culture. So when you think about cultural change in a global sense, some societies see what other societies are doing and they adopt that. They discover that. They haven't invented it. They just adopt it. It's already been invented elsewhere, and they just kind of adapt it and acculturate it into their culture. And then diffusion, spreading products, people, and information from one culture to another, and that's similar to discovery. Let's talk a little bit about invention here, and this social transformation of society should ring a bell with you, okay? When we looked at cultural change over the course of human history, we looked at this and noticed technology, right? So here we have technological innovation. And what you're going to see is that that invention part of a source of cultural change is not just invention of physical technology, but also the invention of new ideas. And that's going to take us to the next slide, okay? This might look familiar to you as well. When we have perception, we just have covered this in the last few chapters, perception and then data and information. So is it possible to change people's perceptions based upon information? And that's invention, discovery, all right? It's not technology in the physical sense, but how do you change people's minds? And, the reverse could be said, in despite of all the data that we have, maybe people's experiences cause people, to change their mind or to understand something strictly based upon people's experiences. So, again, social change involves a lot of things. It could be technology, it can be physical technology, it could be ideas, it could be invention, it can be the transference of ideas and practices and patterns from one place to the next. Here's an example of that. What role does art and music play in transformation, in cultural change, in social change? Um, a larger impact than we think. Now, do we think that art and music and creativity, a creative enterprise, does that have the same type of impact on culture that passing a law does? It's a different type. It's important though. You might pass a law, but you might not change people's ideas about things, or their beliefs, or their practices, or even the norms. But working together with people, you're more apt to be able to do that. Okay. So, other causes of social change, it's in this chapter where you see mention of collective behavior. And so social change can happen in a different time frame or an amount of time, if you will. Some social change can happen immediately. Um, some social change takes a long time to occur. When we look at social transformation of society, in some cases, that's thousands and thousands of years. So it depends on what you're looking at, to understand the amount of change that occurs and how long it takes for it to occur. There's a mention of crowds and mobs and riots. The riots of in the U.S. Capitol in January 6th of this year has proven to be a case study in this idea of social change. Did it change things, or did it really draw attention to something going on in our culture that might be more of a problem? A lot of people got arrested, people got killed. So, causes of social change, it's not just technology, it's not just ideas, but movements. And we're moving into talking a little bit more about social movements. So social movements would be more about ideas and practices and beliefs and that sort of thing. They could involve the invention of new technologies. Could be part of that too. More recently, we've been seeing the impact of social media, social networking on spreading information and sometimes spreading misinformation. And sometimes it's difficult to stop. It certainly has a lot of impact. So, social change happens not just based upon new and good information, but social change can happen based upon bad situations and negative concepts in society, negativity or discrimination or prejudice, even. Disasters. That's part of that immediate change. People's lives and culture can be upended in a moment's notice. Very unexpected. Has tremendous impact too because it's unexpected, and it could really have a lot of reverberation over time and through society. And here's social movements. Okay. So this is more that planned aspect of social change. How does social change occur in a very strategic, planned way? And I'm showing you an example of something. I've been involved in several initiatives in the state and in the region, health initiatives in particular. And this is a initiative I was involved in around smoke-free policies, public health around smoking, and this is a very strategic, planned approach, and one that we were frankly successful in doing. We moved people from denying that smoking, was a problem, or people thought smoking was okay, and we took a very strategic approach. I worked at the state doing this as well, and moving communities and cultures to a point where it was understood that smoking was not okay, and then, even that general sense of the culture of smoking not being okay becomes a reflection of, in this case, positive community public health indicators and physical health factors, right? Um, so that's one example. Another example here, and this kind of illustrates the complexity sometimes of addressing cultural norms. I've been involved quite a bit in Owensboro-Davis County on civic engagement, on promoting dialogue and deliberation as an alternative to debate and conflict and fighting. Dialogue and deliberation does involve differences of opinions, but it encourages people to come together and talk with one another as opposed to, being at odds and being enemies. And this is a model that we use, adapting the previous model that I showed you, and another model around uh, uh, working to promote democracy in society and in communities. So you can be very strategic with it. So I want to end this lecture on looking at 3 different slides here. And you could press pause on these to see this a little bit more. This is a good comparison of some indicators of culture in 1910 and then 100 years later in 2010. Of course, now we know in 2020 the population is 330 million. But look at the incredible amount of difference over that period of time, the amount of social change. And that's 100 years, and that's about 2 generations, right? That may be not your parents, but maybe your grandparents and great grandparents can relate back to this. So you have generations of people that are kind of overlapping as culture changes. Kind of interesting to think about it that way. Another example is this, looking at cultural patterns that have changed. Um, we've gone from being very traditional to being very modern, a lot more diversity of people, diversity of ideas, this time orientation. In older traditional societies, they were linked to the past, and modern societies are, in the present and looking towards the future, trying to grow and get better towards the future. Of course, technology, pre-industrial and traditional societies, and very advanced, in modern societies. And then lastly, a look at social status and role, relationships, communication, social control, social stratification, gender patterns, settlement patterns, a lot of the things that we've been talking about this semester. And again, you could press pause and look through that a little bit more to to kind of get a handle on that. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this lecture. Thank you again for your attention, and see you soon.